that to a client, and we've actually reduced it back from a passive house to the ACB standard because the embodied carbon was such a lot because the walls were getting so thick just to make it work. It was kind of the wrong decision. But you can use the Passivhaus tools to get to where you need to get to with any system.
Yeah.
But,
and just so we've heard everybody, and also to another timber framer, if you like, Jasper, would you like to comment on the question?
Well, you just answered it for me, really. As a timber framer, we specialise in I-beam off-site manufacture with timber frame, and as Jay's saying, the embodied carbon is important to us, and I think the most important thing is ensure that you build to the highest standards you can, in whichever system you use, and then as you look further into it, sustainability comes into the materials, the embodied carbon in the materials.
Okay, thank you, Harvey.
Okay, so we're going to go straight to the next one. So Howard, Howard's asking about air tightness tests and comparing Passivhaus to building regs, which only specify one air tightness test, whereas with the Passivhaus project, you'd have several air tightness tests. Why is that? And at what stages would you typically undertake the air tightness tests?
Right. I could ask anybody, but I'll ask Alan to kick off on that.
okay, thank you, Chris. You don't have to do more than one air tightness test for Passivhaus. You could leave it to the end and just do one, but it'd be a very risky strategy because basically you want to test it during the process to make sure that you're on target. Particularly if you're going to then start covering up your air tightness layer, which could be wet plastic if you're doing masonry. It could be the air tightness boards and membranes if you're doing timber frame. So you want to test it at that early stage before you start putting in all the cabling and other things, just so that if it's not passing, you can go round, you can physically feel where the air's coming in, and you can tape it up and continue going until you get to where you need to get to. There's another big difference between building regulations and Passivhaus in the measurement of air tightness. Building regulations requires air permeability, which is meters cubed of surface area of air moving through it, and Passivhaus is air changes per hour. So they're slightly different metrics. One's volume, one's surface area. The numbers required are usually very similar for a typical house, so it can be very confusing. But you can convert between the two with some formulas and stuff. But the other big difference with the Passivhaus air pressure testing is that it's done both positive and negative pressure tests. This means that if you do it as a negative test, things can be pulled in, and if you do a positive test, things will pushed out. So things like loft hatches and other things have different effects. And in a real house, in a real scenario, there are positive and negative pressures, so it's much better to test both. Building regulations says you can take a positive test and a negative test and take whichever's better, which is quite interesting. Whereas Passivhaus suggests you take a negative and a positive test and you take the average, which to me sounds much more sensible. Also, building regulations, until potentially it's going to change now, requires on house building developments that you only need to test one of each house type. So surprising enough, the one that people are testing is often the better one. They've spent more time on it. Whereas it is moving now to have every house tested, which is great news. But there are some subtle differences between them, between building regulations and Passivhaus on the air tightness test. But just keep testing, really. Just have a test early on, and then test it again if it doesn't get to it, try and find the holes, and then test it again until you get to where you need to get to, and just keep going. It's relatively simple to keep testing, and you can get to quite a low level. You don't need to just give up when you get to 3 air pressure changes. You can go down to 0.6 and maybe even further.
And just to reiterate what Alan's saying, really, I mean, if you don't test at the right stage and you cover things up, the cost to the contractor or to you, depending on whose responsibility it is, can be enormous. And I do know of a contractor that went bust because they didn't do that, and the amount of remedial work sent them under. So it is really important, as Alan says. I think we should probably move on from that. We've covered that fairly well.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So Jocelyn has asked an interesting question. So you've tested your new Passivhaus, the values are all brilliant, and you get it certified. What about in 10 years' time? So are there any indications that you have of deterioration of passive house standard homes in the long run?
Right, I don't know who would like to answer that actually. I mean, I don't want to jump in myself. Jay, oh, Jasper wants to jump in. Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. How well your building performs in 10 years' time, as from now completion of building, it's not yet really been evidenced because we haven't had passive houses on for built in the UK for that long. But the important thing is to use really robust materials, make sure that they're of the highest quality. So just standard duct tape, for instance, will delaminate in with a matter of months sometimes, let alone years. So ensure you use really good proprietary tapes and membranes, etc. And there's no reason why they shouldn't last for that 10 years, for 20 years, for in fact the ProClima products have been certified for 100 years. So there's absolutely no reason it shouldn't pass again and again.
Shall I just go to Jay? Do you want to comment on that? The other timber framer, if you like.
I would say that they tested the very first passive house, didn't they, after 25 years, and it was still performing absolutely perfectly. And that was without all the specialist products and materials that we've got now. So I think, yes, it certainly will last. And it's even more likely now. We use the same ProClima tapes for the very reason that Jasper said, because it's been they've been stress tested for 100 years. So I think that's probably the riskiest part of it, is the taping, probably, I'd say. Otherwise, all the materials are the same as any other build, really. You're just putting to get them together in a slightly different way. So as long as you manage moisture well, like you do in any building, if you're building in timber, and I think use the best, quality. I wouldn't be skimping on the tapes. Apart from that, I don't think there's any issue.
I can see everybody nodding there, and I would completely agree. I would just add that at Green Building Store, my day job, if you like, we built one of the first passive houses, the Denby Dale passive house, and we're considering now paying to have it retested to see what happens. But we shall go in and adjust all the windows and doors before we do, of course, so we get the best chance. But I'm confident the tapes and membranes will be holding up, and the fabric part, apart from those minor tweaks, will be still very good. So. And we'll come back in 10 years, so we'll run this in 10 years' time, and we'll ask Ben what his house is doing then as well. So, shall we move on?
Okay, so Paul has asked a question. It's quite a specific question, but allows you, I think, to talk about the solar gain in perhaps a bit more detail. So Paul's asking, he's got a plot that is surrounded with trees, mainly oak trees, so below 20 degrees sun elevation, and the proposed new house will be in the shade. Is it possible to build passive house because of the solar gain impact, particularly during the winter months? And he's just added the houses in the south of England.
I'll come back to Alan first of all. Again, all our questions could answer this, but
yes, solar gain is important. I think you're saying it's in the shade. Is that right, Harvey?
Yes,
yes, it's in the shade.
Surrounded by trees,
okay.
It's likely to be in the shade. Yeah.
Okay, so surrounded by trees is quite good. One of the real risks is overheating. So we need to be quite careful that we don't have too much solar gain, particularly in the summer, and you don't overglaze. So having some of that trees and shading isn't necessarily a problem. There's two methods of certifying to passive house. One is the heating demand, which you have to get under 15, or is the heat load are less than 10 watts per square meter. So sometimes if you've got particularly dark, lots of cloud or lots of trees and other things, or you're east-west facing because that's all you can do, sometimes you end up certifying under the heat load instead of the heat demand. So that allows you to make sure that you get good levels of insulation, but it's less reliant on the solar gain. So you still get a fantastic house, maybe not quite as efficient, but it's still pretty good. So yeah, to me, I'm often worried more about having too much solar gain than not enough, if I'm honest.
And I think if anybody got lost on the explanation of the two ways to certify,
yes.
the last comment was the one that probably is to remember, if you like. Jay, as another designer, architect, do you want to comment on that?
I'd agree with what's been said, I think it's this misunderstanding that a passive house is a solar house, that you need masses of sun facing, glass facing the south, and our problem all the time is too much glass. So yes, you can do a passive house in a shady site, and it might be a little bit more tricky because you're not getting quite as much solar gain as you would like, maybe, but there's ways of compensating for that. So I doubt it's a problem, and I would be maybe look to have a more efficient shape so it helps you along the way. Go for a little bit more of a better form factor in that location, maybe, to help you along. I'm sure you could get there.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So Marie's question next. So we've been running these Passive House workshops for a couple of years now, and this question, or this phrase, always comes up actually, which is, "Can I open the windows?" So she's asking about the practicalities of living in a passive house, really. So can you open the windows? Can you put in nails to hang up pictures? Is there a sense of claustrophobia when you're living in a passive house? I think Ben's taking us on a tour to answer.
So I'm going to ask Ben how claustrophobic he feels right now. No, you're mute.
Yeah, it's a nightmare living in this house. Here I am, standing at the window, and I can open and close it. Yeah, there's absolutely no difference whatsoever. I don't know what more to say than that. You open the windows when you want to, and you close them when you want to as well. But yeah, there is an open window. There are obviously different windows. While we're looking at a window, in case anyone was wondering, triple glazing. I love the sort of beefiness of these windows, and when they close, they properly seal tight. Back to you.
And I might add to that one of the things that said to me quite early on, which I think stuck, and I find it very helpful, is to say that it has less effect opening the window in a passive house than it does in a normal house, because in a normal house you open the window and you've got holes in the walls basically, so the wind blows through the window and out through the walls. In a passive house, it's like trying to blow into a bottle that actually the wind can't blow in, so it has very little effect. You open the window for quite a long time, it'll have very little cooling effect even in cold weather. So if you like the window open the window. But you may not want to open the window as much because you've got very good air quality. In fact, your air quality gets slightly worse, particularly if you're anywhere with a little bit of pollution when you open the window, because your MVHR system's delivering you nice, clean, filtered air. So, but no problem. And any passive house resident, go and visit a passive house. The passive house open days in November are well, there's plenty of information about them on the Passive House Trust website. There are lots of houses open all over the country. It happens all over the world on around about the 11th of November, 2 days or 3 days in November. I don't know are you opening your house this year, Ben? Yeah. Okay. It's around that period, depending exactly how it falls. It's usually Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Go and visit a passive house. Talk to the people who live there, and these sort of slightly urban myths that develop will be completely dispelled when you talk to the residents. Perhaps we move on from there, Harvey?
Okay, yeah. So there's a real range of questions here. So I know a couple of you are timber specialists, but at the NSBRC we try to be as impartial and independent as we can. So Gary is asking, he's considering doing a self-build using ICF, insulated concrete formwork. What would be more suited for a passive house, the polystyrene type form or the woodcrete, the kind of compressed wood ICF systems, in terms of concrete thermal mass? And does using concrete have a downside when you're kind of putting together the scoring system, the certification of a passive house?
Well, where should we go? Do you want to do that one, Jay? As you don't advocate ICF.
Well, I would say, yeah, stay away from fossil fuel based insulations if you possibly can. And so I would be going for something that was less, the woodcrete version or wood fiber version. As I say, it's got passive house doesn't care, so it's neutral on subject, so you won't get any credit or not for whatever you choose, as long as you hit the targets. Use the PHPP software and hit the targets. So the question why we prefer timber is not to do with passive house. It's got to do with embodied carbon, which is a different topic and discussion point.
Have you worked, Alan? Have you worked with ICF? I can't remember.
We're just about to start one, to be honest. Client driven. That's
not your choice.
Not my choice, no. The wood fibre one is probably, like Jay says, is probably slightly better. I do believe, though, it still has some polystyrene in it as well, to get the insulation. To me, if you need to go down that route, maybe look at the concrete mix. Try and make the concrete as thin as possible. Maybe increase the rebar and the metal in it, because overall you'll have a lower embodied carbon, and possibly lower cost. And also look at the mix of the concrete. So trying to do the greener concretes with the fly ash and the other additives and things to try and reduce down as much as you can. It shouldn't cost you any more to do that. So I would suggest doing that and try and reduce the amount of concrete and the amount of materials. So again, a nice efficient shape would mean less ICF and less concrete. So go for that. But you, like Jay says, it's neutral, passive house. So you can do however you like it to.
And I mean, for some self-builders, ICF seems to make sense, just the way that they feel comfortable building. So, you know, I don't think any of us would necessarily rule it out, but sort of follow those kind of guidelines. I had a client recently who was looking at ICF, and they spent a lot of time looking at reducing the impact of the concrete, did quite a lot of research on it. So you can certainly do a lot of things to mitigate the impact of ICFs. So yeah, should we pick up another one, Harvey?
Okay, yeah, great. From David, nice simple one. So David's budget for his project is going to be tight anyway. Does certification add any value to him, really?
Right. Well, Ben, did you certify? And do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I built a certified passive house. A few reasons for that. Firstly, I've been in this passive house world for a while. I thought if I didn't build a certified passive house, I'd get into trouble with those that be. But I see it as a safety net, really, that if you've, you know, say, for example, you're getting Chris or Jay or, you know, anyone here, I would think you wouldn't need certification because they're going to make sure things get done properly. But I've sort of, you know, through my membership community, I get to see how certain projects are going. And there's one up in Scotland that they've just had an absolute nightmare. And I think the main reason is because there's been no one experienced on there. And probably the only way it's almost on track, I mean, it won't be a passive house, I don't think, is the certification process and the work that's been put in there. So I think that's quite interesting, but there's definitely a learning curve for anyone new coming into this. And I'm sure maybe someone will follow on. Has there not been some research that actually there is often a difference between a certified passive house and one that has, you know, said, oh, we've done it, but they've checked afterwards and they haven't. So that's my piece.
What do you do, Jasper? Do you always recommend it certified, or do you do it as standard?
We always recommend that it's run through PHPP, so you know where you're at. And as Ben said, if you've got somebody like Jay, a conscientious builder, then you could take the chance that you will get what you're asking for sure. But the risk is when it's somebody new to the game, who might be finance driven, etc., and you don't get exactly what you've designed. So testing ensures that you have built exactly as designed, and that's really the whole principle of Passive House, is that it is a system that is worked through so that you do get what's designed. And in regards to value, there's sort of anecdotal evidence that it can increase the value by 10%. And if in 5 years, 10 years time, you want to sell your house, and Passive House is a standard which is accepted, understood, and desired because fuel prices are stupid and it becomes much more valuable, how do you prove it? If you've built the principles, they say yes, but how do I know? And then you might have to do retro testing, certification, and you might not get there. So I think it's really important. And everyone says, well, I don't want to pay the extra for it. It won't be long before that price comes down because people will be more used to it. For a certifier, it's easier to do it with experience, to certify a building with experienced builders, because they know they know the standards that they have to build to, etc. The only difficulty and costly expense for certifiers is when they've got a builder who they have to really work hard to check everything. So yeah, I would always recommend it. And if it can't get to the Passivhaus Classic, then look at a step back standard, which is also run through PHPP, such as the PHI low energy standard or AECB standard.
Yeah, we have it listed. Yes,
Oh, you're
So-
muted.
Sorry. I've been so conscientious about muting myself. Jay or Anne, do you want to add anything? Or I think we pretty much.
I would just like to say I agree with Jasper that you should always do the PHPP model. I used to think when I first started maybe you could get away with not, but I'm now strongly that you need to do it. And then if you want quality assurance, it's because Passivhaus insists on external independent certifier checks. So I think in terms of quality assurance in the long term, that's a very, very good process to have that done. And I think you will get a cost uplift over time. I think you probably would now, but I think you definitely will in time.
Yeah, I would agree to that. And I'd go further. We've got two quick anecdotes. We've had some clients who often come to us and said, "Oh, we're not going to bother certifying it." And to be honest, when we get towards the end, they'll have seen all the stuff we've gone through in terms of getting there, and they want to just prove it. So at that final point, they'll make the decision and say, "Yes, we're going to certify it. We've seen these other houses that say they're Passivhaus, and they're clearly not. So I'm going to spend the money and get the certificate." And like Jay said, the quality assurance thing again is really important. We've got one project at the moment, and some of this data came through on the windows, and we had an overheating issue because we weren't the architects. It was another architect we were helping as a Passivhaus designer with, and it was overglazed. So we'd changed the specification of the glass to lower the G value to allow it to pass in terms of the overheating. The right glass hadn't been installed, and to be honest, the owner didn't know. You couldn't tell by looking at it, and it wasn't until we got the stuff through from the window supplier that the wrong glass had been installed. And so that QA process meant that they had the right project. At the end, the glass was replaced, and the project was certified. So it's a good check that you're getting what you pay for.
Sorry, I'm just going to put something off. Excuse me. The only thing I would add really is that, you know, what would you buy them? Probably the most expensive thing in your life, procuring a new building, and the one thing that you don't bother with quality assurance, because you know you've got to be aware that there isn't any quality assurance on new build buildings, and no significant quality assurance. So this does actually give you the level of quality assurance. It adds all the things that everybody's talked about as well, the possible future value, and you know, actually knowing you're more likely to meet the standard. But actually, that level of quality assurance is completely missing otherwise. So you know, I've never bought a new car, but I wouldn't buy a new car not knowing it wasn't quality assured. You know, and the wheels might fall off, and yet you build a house, you buy a house in that way. There is virtually no quality assurance in there. So. Anyway, right, let's pick the next
Chris, on certification, sorry, just a quick follow-up. Joe's asking, is there a fixed cost for certification, or does it depend on the size of the home that you're building?
As far as I'm aware, and if anybody wants to contradict me,
well, we get varying costs according to complexity of the building, experience of the contractor, and experience of the PH designer.
Great, thank you, Jasper.
Can I just add one more thing on top of that? That I think for ours, because of the procurement route that we went down, those costs were sort of hidden from us. So they're all part of our package, which may be how some people might work with an architecture firm. So it's just we're building a Passivhaus, and that was all swallowed up and within the fees of building that Passivhaus.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, so completely different topic now. So Ian's asking about temperature control, really. So humans, he said, in general prefer different temperature settings. My partner would definitely vouch for that. So typically we like it to be a bit cooler in the evening when we're going to bed, and a bit warmer during the day. With a Passivhaus, is it easy to configure those required range of temperatures that people like to live with?
Right, I'll probably ask one of our two architects to start with that. Who would like to jump? Jay, you'll need to unmute yourself, Jay.
Passivhaus is designed to have a single heating zone, so the whole house is done to a single temperature. So if you want to get different temperatures, and often what people are wanting is a cooler bedroom, and hotter downstairs. So what we often do is we put more of the heating, you know, you do need to have heating in a passive house. There is some requirement. We put more in in the living spaces, and we don't put any heating in the bedrooms. So you tend to get a little bit of stratification if it's a 2-story house between the floors. Also, I mean, if you did a reverse house where you had the heating upstairs, the living spaces upstairs and the bedroom downstairs, you'd get that difference even more. That would work quite well. So you can sort of play with it and get some difference, but in and of itself, it's very difficult to know how much you're going to get, because that's not the way PHPP works. That's not how Passive House is built. I think that's as best as I can say.
You could also be really naughty and open the window in your bedroom.
Okay, are you happy with that, Chris?
We just asked Ben, do you have hideously uncomfortable bedrooms?
Terrible, terrible. Now, I think one thing to bear in mind is, I don't know whether the temperature that you're aiming at is just this funny temperature that actually 20 degrees can be too cold and too hot. And there's a great solution for this. It's put a jumper on or take it off. And I quite often find myself in exactly the same temperature thinking, oh, so you can regulate that. And certainly if you're doing things, let's say you're doing something very physical, like the cleaning in the house, you're going to find it a little bit warmer. So you're going to take the jumper off, but you just get used to it. It's just, you very rarely want it to be a different temperature. It's more in the summer. I'd say it's more for when you're boosting up a lot more. If you've got an area that might be hotter or overheating, but then you just open the window normally, there's a bit of control that you've got to do there if you're using the nighttime cooling strategy.
One of the things I'd say that you need to watch is, we try to watch, if you've got a big window and then a bedroom behind it, that it can be worth putting an external blind, making sure that window is shaded, because PHPP is calculating overheating across the whole house, but it may be a particular window. If it's facing a bedroom and it's quite a limited space, you might get that bedroom getting really warm. So then I would put some sort of shading device on that window. So I'm always watching, like the master bedroom. Be careful that doesn't end up getting loads of sun gain into it, because that could be quite uncomfortable at night, and I don't think then night cooling would be enough to get it down during the night. So I'd be looking for some sort of shading on that window to make sure you didn't get that really hot bedroom.
And we are east facing for our bedroom, so that is something that you don't notice throughout the whole of the year, and then you get to June, and when there's sun coming in through that window from 3 o'clock in the morning, you do notice the temperature rise. But we're not talking massively. You're still not going above early 20s.
But anyone with experience of designing Passive House tends to work with these things. It is, as you say, it's not something actually included in the methodology, but it's something you look for. You become aware of, don't you? So you become aware that although that room, I can't tell, I know that room's going to be a bit overwarmed, so we'll adjust that or play around with it. So there's an art to this as well, in terms of giving people a comfortable passive house in all areas. Yeah. Okay, shall we move on?
Yeah, actually, Ben, just talking about how you were living in your home, Derek and Sandra have asked you a question. I think they must have watched your case study just before this, and they said, what, I can't remember if you mentioned this actually in your presentation, Ben, but they're asking, what air tightness level did you achieve with your home? And if you're willing to divulge it, what are your annual energy bills for your decent sized home?
Yeah, no, I'm slightly embarrassed that I don't know the answer to the second part of that question, what the heating bills are. They're not very much, but we do throughout the winter. I think earlier on someone was talking about this, saying how much do you use your radiators? Well, in a bigger house, we use them virtually every day in the winter, but that's because it's the beginning. They come on at the beginning of the day just to get everything, tweak it up to temperature, and when I say come on, I don't mean like a traditional radiator would, just feel it slightly warm, and then that's it. It probably doesn't do anything for the rest of the day. So air tightness for this house was 0.3, I think, air changes per hour at 50 pascals.
Great, thank you, Ben. Okay, right, so different subject again. So Mark's asking, so far we've spoken about the comparisons with timber frame and masonry, probably leaning towards timber frame as preferences for new build projects. But if someone was looking to upgrade and improve an existing, say, a 1960s house in Mark's example, which was already built with masonry, and they were looking to extend, would that necessarily be an extension built with masonry, or could that be timber?
Shall I jump in on that one?
Yeah, go on, Alan.
Yeah, that's something we do quite a lot of. We try and make sure that the extension is as small as possible to start with, because there's no point doing a huge extension, making sure the building works well. But you can use whatever material you like. And sometimes it comes down to the builder and which sort of skills they have. So if it's, and what finish you've got on the outside of the building. So if you've got a brick finish on the outside, it's a small extension. You've got a builder who traditionally uses masonry, use masonry. If you're looking to have a timber clad external facade, then on the extension, maybe look at timber frame. Maybe look at self-built stuff. So you're maybe do a twin frame, but just design it in maybe a Larson truss that can be put together with a few bits from Jewson's down the road to make up a twin frame. Do it a bit rather than going to the timber frame companies, which can't really cope with a very small scale of a project. That's kind of what I'd suggest. So to do what makes sense. And again, if you're trying to match materials, if it's render, you're putting on the outside of your building. So you're going to do external insulation on the existing house and on the rear. Maybe look at just a single thick block, maybe a 140 block with insulation on the outside, and just match it up. So you don't have any movement between the two, because there can be movement joints between timber and masonry and different settlements and things. So that's what I'd suggest.
I think that gives good guidance there, Harvey.
Yeah, great, thank you. So moving into the last 20 minutes. So this has come up a couple of times actually around underfloor heating. So radiators or underfloor heating, which is better as a heating source? And also Julian's added to that and say, looking at wood burning stoves, are they a waste of time, or could they be used as a source for heating as well?
I'm going to go to Jasper actually, just because there's a lot of wood where he lives, I know, and so wood burning is more attractive than for many. But what do you recommend, Jasper?
We get a lot of clients who want to have a wood burning stove because they love the look of an open fire or log burner, and they, if they're small enough, they can help, but it's very risky in respect that you might want to run it for an hour and that's enough and turn it off again, because it's so easy to heat a passive house. You really don't need a fierce source of heat. Underfloor heating, we have clients who don't fit underfloor heating and clients who do. I mean, we work in a timber frame passive house office and we didn't choose underfloor heating. We chose electric radiators, which in our first year we move about to heat the areas that we need to use, and within an hour or so we're up to the temperature we need to be, and it's comfortable, and it's really easy to maintain that temperature. Underfloor heating, if you use that, I've not had a lot of feedback from clients who have used it as yet, but you'd have to run it at quite a low temperature and it's slow response. So that is the trickiness with underfloor heating. So yes, my first suggestion would be wood burning stove will probably be quite redundant in the building, unless you want to open all the windows as well as have the burning stove going. Because the problem with wood burning stoves, you have to have the air intake to match the flue going out, and so that can be in a balanced way, but it's not easy.
Ben's there with trying to let us see something. I can't actually see what's behind very well. So.
Well, I thought that this is just quite an interesting anecdote. Obviously, this comes up a lot, doesn't it, when people say, oh, we want a wood burner, it's really, really important. And during the process, I think it was Mike Coe suggested to my wife, because she really wanted one, oh, why don't you have a bioethanol burner? Because it's not like the same thing like a cam, but it sort of gets you off the hook of, you've ticked this box. So this is one behind me here. I've been in the house for 18 months now. I'm not touching it. It's nothing to do with me. It's never been used. So there we go. And yeah, no underfloor heating here as well, you just don't need it. It's just, I think, am I right in saying it'd be used more with retrofit? That is an area sometimes if you're linking that out with a heat pump, you might do. But just thought I'd throw that in, a little wander around the house.
I think that proves it.
And I would say when we built the Denbigh house, which was one of the first, our clients, they started off wanting a wood burner, and because it was very early days, and you know, we were really worried about it, and we didn't think we could do it a wood burner. We didn't think we could do a passive house either, but we persuaded them not to have a wood burner, but they did want underfloor heating, so we put electrical underfloor heating in as an extra in the kitchen, because Kate had, our client had very cold feet, which I totally resonate with because I do too, and they've never put the fuse in it, so we just put it in as an extra and never used it, because the thing about a passive house is that floors are warm anyway. You know, every surface is warm, isn't it? Because everything is insulated, you're all within a thermal envelope. So a lot of the advantage of underfloor heating is lost. You may use underfloor heating if you're using a heat pump, 'cause it may be more efficient at very low temperature, but it is very difficult to control because you don't want to, the thermal mass means that you can rather overshoot on temperature. Do anybody else want to comment, or yeah?
I just say I had a client who really wanted to put underfloor heating in, and it was going to massively overheat the house. And what we decided in the end, to put some electric, so not water, put a bit of extra electric in a patch in his living space, and I think that's going to work. I suspect it's going to work quite well. I'm quite interested. So he sort of got his idea of an underfloor heating, but in a much more limited way, be much cheaper, and it's also in the space where he's probably most likely going to need it. So I think that probably would work as quite a good compromise.
And you might find, like Denbigh, they never put the fuse in, Joe, because they're comfortable without it. Okay, shall we move on?
I just add something quickly to that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris. Yeah, we've had houses where we put underfloor heating in, partly because it's kind of, they thought about the resale value afterwards, about if you don't have any heating in, what are people going to say? So they put it in, and it's been used very, very little. I think 20 minutes last winter, so it's not worth it. There is, in terms of the heating sources, there are some interesting thoughts now coming through from the Passivhaus Institute in Germany about using air-to-air heat pumps, which is something I think worth watching. They're not incredibly efficient, but there's probably, I mean, previously I would have said almost a fan heater is the way to go. It's nice and quick and heats your space up and move on. But probably the air-to-air is probably the slightly better, because it has a slightly better coefficient to using the heat pump in it. So I think that's the one to watch.
I don't think there will be a lot of developments on the heating side in passive houses. As passive house, this sort of standard of building, rolls out and becomes greater. The solutions are still quite limited at the moment, aren't they?
That's right, and it's just tinkering around the edges really, because we've got such a small amount of heat demands. It doesn't really matter how you do it. Heat it with a hairdryer or put a computer on or other things. So it's a small issue to worry about.
The main issue, in fact, is how you heat your hot water, really, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so Jerry has asked this a couple of times, so I'd like to get this answer for Jerry if we can. So how would you apply passive house principles to a partial basement construction on a sloping site?
Who would like to have a go?
I'll have a go. It's tricky with masonry underground because you've got that risk of thermal breaks happening, but you can apply the raft principle to a basement where the EPS insulation, whichever insulation you might use, can run up the sidewalls up to breaks at the surface. So it can just be an extension of your slab, really. If you think of it like that, it's just your slab, but further down in the ground, with the insulation wrapping up a bit further. So it's possible. It's likely to be expensive, a lot of shifting the soil, and it's an expensive form of construction, but it is possible.
And of course, it's very common in Germany because basements are much more common than they are.
Yes. We almost treat it as a standard form of construction in a lot of places in Germany and Europe.
So there'll be plenty of detailing available if you want to look that up
Yeah, there are companies who supply here from Europe. Essentially, they come in and do the basement to whatever standard you want to.
Anybody else got experience that they want to share, or do you think we've covered it well?
I just say that the company that does certify Passive House in the UK is called Glatar. So that's interesting to know. They're a very good company, a German company. And then if we're doing this part in, part out, we do exactly what Jasper said. It's just like having the concrete coming up the side and having insulation on the outside. So it's, yeah, and you treat it in the pH would be the same as you would do the house above. You know, you measure the areas and put the materials in and off you go.
Okay, we're racing towards the finish, Harvey.
Yeah, so we've got 10 minutes left.
A few more in if we can.
Yeah, we'll try to. Perhaps if we just go to 1 or 2 people for each of these, see how many more we can get through. So Rupert is asking, what are the pros and cons of a vapor open breathable fabric or membrane in the Passive House design?
I'm sure we just get one who would like to comment on that. Jay or Jasper, who jumps first?
It's just, yes, it's important if you're using natural materials that you manage moisture safely. So if you're building in timber and natural insulations, then in the UK temperate climate, you need to allow the moisture to dry to the external air. If you're building in masonry or ICF or something like that, then there's nothing there to rot, so it's not an important part of what you're doing. So it's all about what you're building with. So if you're doing anything with natural materials, you need to manage moisture safely, and then vapor, open and breathable construction becomes key, really, to safe. It's building biology. Passive House is building physics. Moisture is building biology. You need to be very careful with building biology if you're building in timber.
Yeah, probably go on to the next one, Harvey.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Jay. Are there any special considerations required when designing a detached bungalow?
I think, Alan, do you want to have a go at that? Yeah, I think you've
some
interesting forms that you've worked with.
Yeah. We've done some bungalows. And we've got, in fact, the ICF one we're working at the moment is a bungalow. It is very tricky because of the form factor. Basically, you've got a large surface area, a large heat loss area compared to the usable floor space. So you do end up having more insulation. So having a good shape is really important. Don't try and do a C-shaped bungalow. That's a bad idea. Yeah, so you can do it, but maybe look at trying to put some rooms in the roof. So there's kind of tricks and you can do with that. So you might do a little like a crown roof with a flat roof in the middle or something like that, so you can get some usable space up there, by keeping the roof ridge as low as possible, which may be the requirement in terms of planning. Another thing, so you can kind of sneak one in, some space up there if you can. That'd be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll keep racing now, Harvey.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to pretend I understand what this next question means, but I'm hoping one of you do. So, is it achievable to use the water seagull post and beam self-build method to make a passive house?
I was just looking at that question, actually.
Do you want to explain it first?
Yeah, the water seagull
don't know what it
method is where it's a bit like a post and beam construction. So it's paired timbers which are bolted together, which form the structure, and then the insulation layer is wrapped around it. What can happen with the Walter Seagull method is that there is structure which runs from inside to outside, so that can offer throw up risks of cold bridging and also water penetration. So the principle of the Walter Seagull method can be, but you just have to be a bit more careful about how you detail those junctions of where a supporting joist, a pair joist, would run through the building. So it's, for instance, if you imagine like a balcony, if the joists for a balcony run through from the inside to the outside, then that is a thermal break, also a migration route for water. So you have to be careful about how that's detailed.
Walter Seagull was a visionary in terms of what he did and the build method, wasn't he? But it wasn't really quite adapted to what we need to do to achieve the sort of performance we want to do with Passive House. Yeah. Okay. keep going. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. No, I should read up on Walter Siegel later on tonight, I think, for
Very
tomorrow.
interesting, a very interesting guy he was, yeah.
There was a question here, Chris, that I'm just seeing, it's just disappeared, but it was basically, you mentioned that there was different types of certification or passive house standard that people could achieve. Like there's the classic standard, premium standard. Could you just briefly explain the differences between those?
Right, I'll pass that on to, what's the John?
Shall I do it?
Alan, do you want, yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. I've done a Passivhaus Plus.
You've kind of actually, haven't you? I think.
Yeah, we've done a Plus, but we were trying for premium, didn't quite get it, to be honest. So basically, Passivhaus Classic is just your Passivhaus standard in terms of the heat demand. And then on top of that, because of the move towards zero carbon and looking at the total energy use, the Passivhaus Institute added in some additional standards to look at that to meet more of the European standards. So you're looking at adding renewables. So that could be, typically that would be photovoltaic PV panels producing electricity. It could be other forms of renewables as well. So you're looking at the primary energy part of it, the other uses apart from just, so you're looking at the heating, looking at the hot water, you're looking at the appliances and everything else, and trying to minimize those and then offset that with some power. So if you put most of the roof filled with PV, you'll get Passivhaus Plus, and if you go even more, you can get to premium. And you can do that for both the Passivhaus new build and also for the retrofits. So the Enefit, the retrofit standards, you can have Enefit Premium and Enefit Plus as well. So it's just an add-on towards zero carbon.
And Ben, did you look at going beyond the Classic when you did yours?
I don't think so, and one of the reasons perhaps for that was my wife being quite stuck in her ways and wanting to see a roof, you know, a tile roof, not wanting any PV or anything up there. And we also, you know, if we're going to use other renewables for some of the hot water heating, the logical place was at a place that would annoy the neighbour. So we sort of, went out, not for great reasons perhaps, but quite happy with the Passivhaus Classic.
You don't mean the logical place was a place that annoyed the neighbour, but it would have been a place that annoyed the neighbour.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know whether there is as much noise from, say, an air source heat pump as perhaps there is in my mind, but you know, you might get exactly the same from a gas boiler. But that was something that, because we had a lot of friction during ours over balancing things with the neighbour. So
I'll just throw in here that, I mean, in the end, for all of us, I think anybody would disagree, Passivhaus Classic is the fabric of the building, and that was what Passivhaus is really about fundamentally. It's getting the fabric right. The other standards are in effect bolt-ons relating to renewables. They're extra and they have a place, but the fundamental is getting the fabric of the building right. So, and that's where we all come from. And sorry, Jay, yeah?
Yeah, I'm just going to add in at the end when you finished.
Oh, right, okay. Well, all I was going to add then is also, if you can't meet the Passivhaus standard at all, there is the Institute, as I think, who was it, Ben or Jasper? Yeah, there is the Passivhaus low energy, the Institute's low energy standard, which they're not keen for you to use as a certification standard. What they want it used as a fallback. So if you aim for Passivhaus and you miss, at least you get a piece of paper to say you're nearly there. If you can't meet that for whatever reasons, there is also the AECB building standard, which is a UK standard developed by the Association for Environment Conscious Building. The AECB actually founded the Passivhaus Trust, and it's effectively a sister company. And the ACB building standard is intended as a transitional standard, really, to allow people to build where it is too onerous, or if it's social housing, people can't quite go that far. But there is a standard that uses the same methodology with a slightly lighter touch. So that's something to be aware of as well, Mike. Jay, you can.
Yes, I was going to say that a good example is about what your fuel source is, about where your fuel is. Because so you build your classic house, there's your house. And if you then heat it, a typical house, say with gas, a gas boiler, you might be emitting a ton, or well, you'll be over a ton of carbon to heat that house. Whereas if you were having an air source heat pump and heating with electric energy, you'd be about 0.2 of a tonne of carbon in the year. So actually what Passivhaus Plus is trying to do is to get you think about your fuel sources, and it actually makes a big difference to how much carbon is being emitted over time, because there's a huge difference between gas, well, oil, gas or electric. And electric, the carbon intensity of electric has plummeted over the last 7 years. So it really makes a difference if you can move towards electric solutions for your passive house, and then you'll start to achieve the Passivhaus Plus just by taking that strategy.
That's a good comment. Yeah, thank you. Do you want to squeeze one more in, Harvey, or do you want to be?
I think sadly we've come to the end. Yeah, so I need to stick to the hour. So there's just, yeah, so thank you so much to everyone on the panel for your contribution in this session and also during the day. And thank you to everyone for watching. As I've seen a few nice comments coming through on the chat, so I know people have enjoyed the session, so that's great to see as well. This is only day one, so we're back again for day 2 tomorrow. So I'm just going to quickly run through the timetable for tomorrow's session. So at 10 o'clock, we've got Chris doing the introduction to Passivhaus. So if you missed that this morning, or why not, if you just want to watch it again, it was so good. Then
Unlikely, Harvey.
Chris will be back at 10 o'clock to do the introduction to Passivhaus principles and set up day 2. We've then got Jay's colleague Anna, who's talking partly about the Areba's 2030 climate challenge. And I know there's also an interesting case study in that presentation as well, which would be good to look at. We've got a chap called Paul Smith from the Green Building Store, really focusing on what you should be thinking about in terms of windows and doors of fenestration. Alan, you're back again tomorrow, not in the centre tomorrow. I think you're going to be at home tomorrow, aren't you? So, and Alan's talking about comfort benefits from Passivhaus and the performance gap. And I know we've had a couple of questions about that today. So that will be at 1 o'clock tomorrow. 2 o'clock, we've got Clarissa Uden from Total Home Environment, really focusing on heat recovery and mechanical ventilation systems and their place within passive homes. And then it finishes again at 3 o'clock with another question time session with all of tomorrow's panelists. So we've done our best. I hope you could see that we did our best to try and get through as many questions as we could in the hour. It's flown by, but if you haven't had your question answered, or you're led in bed tonight and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. So please do join us again. I will send out a link just so everyone's got it for tomorrow. So you've got a fresh set of links for all the webinars and things. All of the sessions from today have been recorded, bar the first 4 minutes of this one, because somebody forgot to press record. So apologies for that. But we just missed the first bit of the first question, but all the sessions have been recorded today. It will take us a couple of days just to edit them and download them and put them into a watchable format. So at some point in the coming week, I will send you an email with links to all of the sessions from both days. So you'll have that and you'll be able to rewatch those sessions. But other than that, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Chris, to Ben, to Jay, to Jasper and Alan for joining us today, and for everyone watching. I hope you've enjoyed the workshop, our first ever virtual workshop, and hopefully we shall see some of you back tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. Other than that, thank you very much. Stay safe, everyone. Have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.